During our 3-week summer break, we've decided to rebroadcast our Samuel Little series, first released in the fall of 2020. There have been a number of updates since those episodes aired. We want to share them with you here in the re-airing of the first episode. And more importantly, we want to draw attention to the victims who still remain unidentified and the confessions that are unmatched. In order to give you the fullest picture of what's happened since September 2020, we'll cover everything concerning every case and not limit ourselves to the Southeast. The most important news, the news you've likely heard and that we've mentioned briefly, is that Samuel Little died on December 30th, 2020. This was nearly 50 years to the day since he picked up his first known victim, Mary Brosley, who he would kill on New Year's Eve, 1970. His cause of death was first reported as, quote, medical conditions, and it was never amended to be more specific. The LA Times speculated he passed away from COVID-19, but no documentation has been provided. And, to our best knowledge, there's never been any indication that foul play was involved. Per The Guardian, he was taken to a hospital outside the prison. It's not unusual for inmates to be treated at outside facilities, though most care happens on site. According to Pew Research Center, some acute or specialized care must happen at local hospitals. And this is pure speculation, something we don't usually indulge in, but we wonder if there was some hope among officials that, with the best care available, Samuel Little might live a while longer. Why? Again, it is just a guess, but there are so many victims left to identify, and authorities are still in the process of considering more crimes that may be linked to Little. In the end, he may have murdered more than 93 people. When he died, he took what information he hadn't yet shared with him, and that might be important, because they can't question him now about particular people. But they do know where he's been, and they've traced his movements. Our own research assistant at the Fall Line, Brian Waters, he built out a timeline that traces Little's movements for decades, and there are very few gaps in it. So maybe there is enough information out there to identify victims that are currently considered possible matches. We hope so. As of today, June 22nd, 2021, there are 8 Jane Does across the United States who have been linked to Samuel Little, but not yet identified. We'll have their likenesses posted on our social media during the break. They are the women known as Donna, found in Miami in 1971, Prince George's County Jane Doe, found in Maryland in 1972, Orleans Parish Doe, found in New Orleans in 1982, Bibb County Jane Doe, found in Georgia in 1977, the Jackson County Jane Doe, found in Mississippi in 1977, the Lake County Jane Doe, found in Ohio in 1970, the Owen County Jane Doe in Kentucky in 1988, and the Crittenden County Jane Doe, found in Arkansas in 1990. When Little died, there were a number of cases still in process, including murders that investigators were still working to link to him. Per news channel WWL, a New Orleans family, the Wyatts, still suspect Little of killing their sister and aunt, Andretta Wyatt. Her manner of death and her description seem to match a confession Little gave investigators in 2018 when he, quote, admitted to meeting a woman in New Orleans, then killing her along a canal near the Little Woods exit of Interstate 10. What investigators can do with that now, if anything, we don't know. Another case that seems to be in limbo is the murder of Willie Mae Bivens down in Tallahassee, Florida. Per the Tallahassee Democrat, another man was arrested for her murder in 1985, but the case is being re-examined because of weak evidence, with Little as a strong suspect. That case, too, will face obvious challenges. Even with Little gone, there are agencies who are still working to confirm cases or possible matches in their cities, or verify claims Little made before his passing. For instance, the Cincinnati Enquirer reported that the city detectives, who were able to meet with Little before he died, are still doggedly working an unmatched confession. Why are they still doing it? As one of the investigators told the paper while looking at a sketch Little had drawn of the mystery homicide victim, quote, "She's worth it, right?" And there have been some hopeful developments too. According to WJLA, the Prince George's County Jane Doe, who was recovered in Maryland in 1972, is currently at the University of North Texas, where NamUs is housed, undergoing DNA extraction. There haven't been any more updates, but our assumption is that they will attempt to identify her via forensic genetic genealogy. And the Fall Line podcast was also able to help, in its way, with a case. Last year during our work on the series, research assistant Brian Waters used our Ancestry account to pull some basic genealogical information from a public family tree, a tree that included one of Little's victims. Using that information, we were able to include the full name of Miriam Eileen Chapman, a Florida area victim who went by Angela. We were also able to identify her hometown. Miriam was originally from Indiana and had lost touch with her family. What we didn't know at the time of publication was that we had more information than the local authorities. Of course, if we had known that, we would have passed along the information immediately. It wasn't until a reporter from the Press Courier reached out and asked us for a few more details for a story, and which Brian happily pulled for him, that we discovered that those details helped law enforcement locate a distant relative. Then Brian, who's in training to become a forensic genetic genealogist, was able to further assist investigators in locating Miriam's closer family members. We learned that they were unaware that she was a victim of Samuel Little, or that her death had been reported on in the media. We've linked to the news stories on our website that cover this case, if you'd like to read more of Miriam's story and Brian's interview with the Miami Herald. There's been more media coverage of other victims, too. Washington Post reporters Wesley Lowery, Hannah Knowles, and Mark Berman released a 3-part piece that focused on the victims of Samuel Little. In that, they mentioned at least one more woman who they believe might be a victim, Mary Ann Jenkins. She died in 1977 in Illinois and was labeled a lightning strike victim, but that cause of death is being disputed. They also offer up a possible name for a Jane Doe who still needs to be identified. The Memphis Jane Doe reminds family members of a woman named Zena Jones, who disappeared just before the Memphis Jane Doe was recovered. According to news channel WREG, Zena Jones told family members in Tennessee that she had plans to hitchhike to Chicago. There are also 2 more confirmed victims of Samuel Little who can be added to the list of the named. First, as we briefly mentioned late last year, the woman formerly known as the Dade County Jane Doe, who was found in Georgia in 1981, but who was suspected to be from Tennessee, she has officially been identified as Patricia Parker. Her family recognized the reconstruction done by Kelly Lawson of the GBI, and the match was confirmed in late 2020. And recently, Little has been linked to a wrongful conviction case. Per the Miami Herald, 17-year-old Dorothy Gibson was murdered in 1977. A man named Jerry Townsend was convicted of her murder. Recently, though, she's been identified as the unmatched confession of a woman Little called Linda. He'd drawn a portrait of her and wrote on it, "Girl at the bus stop. Hotel and back." Dorothy had indeed been murdered at a bus stop just in front of a hotel. And per U.S. News, Little abandoned her body in the bushes nearby. Things are not good, but they are better. It's not the resolutions for these cases, these families, or the stretching margins that got us here in the first place. But the work is continuing. People are continuing to try and find and identify Little's victims. And there does seem to be a tide turning in true crime. away from the killers and toward the victims themselves. It's good to see. The next step is even more important: destigmatizing, decriminalizing, and stabilizing our society, making it a harder place for Samuel Little and all the other monsters like him to hunt. We will be rebroadcasting all 4 episodes of the Samuel Little series, starting with episodes 1 and 2 this week. Please listen with fresh ears. You might pick up on details you didn't before. Anything could help. As a reminder, this series contains discussions of graphic violence, sexual assault, and murder. Listener discretion is strongly advised. This is The Fall Line.
Well, tell me about this girl. What does she look like?
She was kind of thin, dark skinned, about 40 years old. She was out there hustling. I think she was a drug addict because she wouldn't have been out there.
How tall was she?
She was about 5'5", 5'3".
And how much do you think she weighed?
She weighed about 110, 120.
Okay. What about her did you know?
The boy came, that was her son. And she called him over there. And he came over, hey, he shook my hand and everything, yeah.
Where do you eventually take her body to?
I was headed toward California.
Mm-hmm.
So as I drove out of Las Vegas, I seen a motel and a road leading up to the motel. And there's a lot of bushes and brushes beside the road before you got to that motel. That's where I pulled up her body out and rolled it down there. And I heard a secondary roll of noise. That meant she was still rolling.
We all hope that we'll recognize a monster when we see one. But that's the trouble. The monsters are people too. They blend in. They like to walk at the edges of society where they won't be seen and where their victims won't be missed. On September 5th, 2012, a sick old man was arrested at a Kentucky homeless shelter. He was 72 then, and he's 80 now. And he's frailer than he once was, with multiple health issues, diabetes, a heart condition. He often has to use a wheelchair. In interviews, he is generally friendly. He calls women baby. He signs letters with God bless. Talk to him long enough, though, and he'll get around to the killing. He knows what visitors want to learn about, and it's what he likes to discuss. That way, he can relive his long life, crime by crime, woman by woman. They found him in Kentucky, but he wasn't there long. According to the FBI, he was extradited to California, supposedly to face a narcotics charge. But he was suspected of much more. At the time of that arrest, investigators were able to take a DNA sample, and then LAPD matched this elderly man to 3 unsolved murders, all from the 1980s, when he would have been in his late 40s. It's said that some serial killers slow down as they age, but not him. He was and is a sexual sadist, and he always knew who he could get away with killing. That old man is Samuel Little. After he was sentenced in Los Angeles, other departments began to question him, and he started talking, confession after confession. With nearly 100 victims, and about 60 of those confirmed, he is the most prolific serial killer the United States has ever seen. The Green River Killer, Gary Ridgway, held the title before him. Ridgway killed an estimated 71 women over roughly 16 years. Like Little, he knew who to hunt, but authorities knew about the Green River Killer long before Ridgway was actually arrested. Samuel Little, he didn't have an official nickname. not like the Golden State Killer. Some LA cops called him the choke and stroke killer, a crude reference to the masturbation that accompanied his murders, but that hasn't caught on in the media. Frightening names sell papers. Son of Sam, the Zodiac, the Boston Strangler. With little, nothing. He was an unknown presence. He drifted in and out. Sometimes, no one even noticed his victims were gone. Little murdered in at least 19 states, and there are victims who still need identification all over the map. The scope of these crimes is bigger than the Southeast, much bigger. Though the Southeastern victims are who we'll cover in these episodes, know there are more women, unmatched confessions, and Jane Does whose names he didn't bother to learn. Their killer has become famous, but the victims are largely indistinguishable. Portrait after portrait produced by their murderer. He makes sure to sign all the pictures. Word is, he's taking art commissions from his prison cell. And people will study him. What will they find? What's there in the beginning is there in the end. He is violent. He has a fixation on necks, something that he believes began in grade school. And he is comfortable treating every other person on Earth as an object. And yet, we will learn every angle of his life eventually. And his name will be remembered. But what about the women? Victims were often, but not always, sex workers. Some used drugs. Many, but not all, were Black women. If their bodies were found, they were occasionally listed as accidental deaths or undetermined cause. The clear homicide cases stayed cold, though suspicion was sometimes cast on those who knew them. And that's if the victims could be identified at all. The term sex work was coined in 1978, but has only recently made its way into cultural consciousness. That happened around the time it became recognized that sex workers have often been treated by authorities and media as the less dead. That is, the victims whose cases were deemed unimportant because of the nature of their work. The very existence of the term the less dead, the fact that we need it to describe a problem, is a good place to start bringing the lives and health of sex workers into focus. And ultimately, the killer doesn't, or rather shouldn't, matter. He's gotten plenty of attention. He loves it. What else can you learn about that? He had a hard childhood, and he is a hard adult too. He sometimes signs his letters from, quote, Mr. Sam and his girls, as if he had collected them. He told one correspondent that, quote, they are no one's but mine. I own all of them, and no one can have them but me. He calls them, quote, angels in heaven, and says, quote, I love them and they love me. And he gets to talk because he's handing over information to investigators. They need what he can tell them, and they need it soon. He's a sick old man. Old age has slowed him down, but he is still a predator. He likes power, and we don't want to give him any more. We have to tell you some things to connect the threads of the stories, the women's stories, to explore the confessions he offered up to Texas Ranger James Holland. And we can start with his endless traveling. As long as he kept moving, his crimes appeared unconnected. Throughout the second half of the 20th century, Little drove a white Cadillac and a gold Pontiac Le Mans and a Lincoln Continental. He often traveled with a woman named Jean, a much older girlfriend who supported them both by shoplifting. For a while, a teenage boy traveled with them too. Alone or with his traveling companions, Little rode the highways and interstates, moving from one cheap hotel to another. Some towns, like Miami, he visited again and again. Others only had to suffer him once. And he didn't do much to cover his tracks. He often left bodies at the scene of the crime, along roads or half buried in hard ground or dragged a few yards into the wetlands. He wasn't a criminal mastermind, and yet he knew who he could get away with killing. He walked softly along the margins. He bet on apathy, and he was right. He was arrested dozens of times, starting in his early adolescence. Author Gillian Lauren compiled a list of at least 21 charges. The worst included violence, rape, aggravated assault, assault with great bodily harm, armed robbery. The list goes on. This was before any murder charge. In total, before his California conviction, he served about 10 years in prison. In 1982, he was accused of murder, but a grand jury declined to indict him in Mississippi. Then he was acquitted once again in Florida. And 2 years later, across the country, in San Diego, he strangled 2 women who both survived. According to the Los Angeles Times, he served less than 3 years for both attacks. He was out by early February of 1987, and he would kill and kill and kill into the 21st century. He may have killed right up until his final arrest in 2012. Nowadays, Little looks for all the world like a grandfather. Not that that should matter. Joseph D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer, looks frail during his hearings too. Everyone gets old. Little is just sicker than most. He is what Henry Lee Lucas pretended to be. A man with no fixed address, killing when he wanted, leaving cold cases, sometimes even uninvestigated cases, in his wake. As of August 2019, the Radford FGCU serial killer database entry for Samuel Little was sparse. It lacked most of the information available on other killers, like background, family, military service, IQ scores. When Gillian Lauren's forthcoming book on Little is eventually released, perhaps those gaps will be filled in. In our cultural imagination, the modern serial killer is a man between 20 and 40 years old. He is nearly always white. There are exceptions like Eileen Wuornos or Richard Ramirez or Lonnie Franklin Jr. But until the Samuel Little story broke, a Google search for serial killers would return a gallery of similar faces, nearly all adult, white, and male. But there are many others who do not fit those parameters. Samuel Little is only one example. Another assumption made is that serial killers principally target and murder victims of their own race. We've mentioned that fact before, right here on this show. Everyone knows this isn't universally true. Besides Samuel Little, Gary Ridgway is an example of a murderer who killed women of all races. Ridgway's primary interest was occupation, because he knew he could target sex workers. And because they had to work in the margins, Ridgway knew how to make himself seem safe. Sometimes he brought his young son along with him to wait in the car while his father committed murder in an alley or a little ways off on a rural road. Sometimes just driving around with a car seat in his vehicle was enough. It created a suggestion of safety. And when sex work is criminalized, that kind of gamble can be forced. Get in a car, hoping it won't be the last time. Any subculture that operates outside the law, or even within the law, but under restrictions of prejudice and hate, that's going to be an easy place to find victims. Think of Bruce MacArthur. He was a quiet 60-something landscaper living in Toronto. He was known as a fixture in the gay scene and often picked up younger men. Sometimes he used dating apps where he described a preference for, quote, submissive men. His conquests were mostly South Asian and Middle Eastern men, some of whom were immigrants to Canada, some of whom were closeted. Some weren't reported missing. Others were, but often no one knew where to look for them, particularly if they hadn't been out to family and friends. At least one victim was a sex worker and homeless. Authorities were slow to respond to reports of missing men, and it would be years before MacArthur was arrested. His earliest confirmed murder was in 2010, and he killed until 2017. That's when a task force was formed to investigate the mounting death toll. MacArthur was finally arrested in 2018. And according to the CBC, investigators found body parts of his victims buried in the landscaping boxes that were among his business supplies. It took Bruce MacArthur nearly a decade to be caught, but he might have been operating longer than that. And Samuel Little? He got away with murder for 42 years, give or take. After his extradition from Kentucky, Samuel Little was held in California. There, he was eventually convicted of 3 Los Angeles murders, those of Carol Elford, Guadalupe Apodaca, and Audrey Nelson, in 2014. It was DNA that finally got him in those cases. His skin cells and his semen were found at the crime scenes way back in the 1980s. Technology and backlogs finally caught up with him. But those weren't the only victims. There were more, and investigators were certain, even before the confessions began. Most of Samuel Little's crimes have come to light thanks to a Texas Ranger, James Holland. He managed to form a relationship with Little and helped other agencies interview the killer. According to numerous outlets, the two men have formed a sort of friendship, calling each other by nicknames and developing a rapport that includes inside jokes and shared snacks. It's clear this is an interrogation tactic, and it seems to be effective. Though Holland declined to comment for this series, it's easy to get a sense of his role. When a case is resolved, Holland is name-checked by reporters and law enforcement. Some seem amazed that he's been able to get answers from Little. According to the LA Times, Holland is the person who convinced Little to draw his victims' portraits in the first place. Holland knew that Little considered himself an artist, and he used that information well. But Holland isn't the only person who's helped reconstruct the crimes of Samuel Little. According to the FBI's newsfeed, the use of VICAP was instrumental in connecting Little to murders across the USA. VICAP, or Violent Crime Apprehension Program, is a database maintained by law enforcement, but it's not exhaustive. Agencies are not mandated to report, and having comprehensive data is absolutely essential in connecting cases. Kevin Fitzsimmons, VICAP supervisory crime analyst, was quoted on the official webpage as saying, quote, "The biggest lesson in this case is the power of information sharing. These connections all started in our database of violent crime. But it's not just investigators who've contributed in compiling and sometimes even resolving these murders. So many others have lent their skills. In fact, a records bureau chief down in Florida managed to piece together information vital to some of the Southeastern cases. Along with California, Florida is the state where Little killed most often. On New Year's Day, 1971, he was 30 years old. And down in the Everglades, Little buried the woman now known as his first victim. Her name was Mary Brosley. He'd met her in Miami at a bar. She was found 23 days later, but wasn't identified until 2017. According to WUSA 9, Little told investigators about the murder during his confessions. He reportedly said that he'd never again tried to bury someone in Florida. The ground was just too hard. But he didn't stop killing in the state, and a woman named Linda Brown was able to reassemble parts of his trail. Linda Brown spoke with us in 2019. She's the Record Bureau Chief in Gainesville, Florida. She's worked there for over 30 years. She told us that her job includes many responsibilities, including management of all incoming records, of archives, of public requests. We became aware of Brown during our research when we found a few news stories in 2013 and 2014 that described her work. She told us that her involvement with the case began when some California detectives reached out to her, hoping she might be able to find some very old records.
I can tell you in our area and working with different agencies, there's a lot of archive records that are in paper, and there's even now and again you find some old video storage recordings, and there's no longer any equipment to take that data and convert it to modern technology. And we at the Alachua County Sheriff's Office made a plan years ago that we would not destroy records. We found that it's surprising in working cold case investigations that the littlest bit of information, such as somebody was trespassed from a location at a date and time 20 years ago, well, that puts them in the vicinity of where the murder may have taken place, or where some other crime took place. Or it talks about these two kids were hanging out together getting into mischief. Well, that report in and of itself is of no value to anybody. Nobody cares. But if it turns out that one of those kids has turned into a serial killer or maybe just a car thief or any number of crime trends, then that information places them at that area, and it helps you get to the bottom of what's going on and who's committing the crimes and hopefully putting a stop to it. So we're still trying to figure out how to convert a lot of that paper. We probably still only have 20% of our old or archive records converted. But the real challenge is you don't know which one of those reports is going to be the valuable piece. So you pretty much need to figure out how to save it all. And then storage with that paper, paper takes up so much room. We have thousands of boxes now of archive records, and we have to pay to store them.
We asked Brown to describe her role in connecting the Samuel Little in California with the Sam McDowell who'd been acquitted for murder down in Florida.
I received a phone call from a California detective, and at the time he was telling me that he'd gotten a copy of a warrant affidavit on Sam. Actually, it was Samuel McDowell that was processed through our records, I believe. So he actually had a case number, but he said, "This is all I've got." That sounds very helpful, but unfortunately, in 30 years ago, paperwork, and even 20 years ago, paperwork, they assign numbers pretty much right and left. And so when somebody would transfer those numbers into different systems, they wouldn't always give us the number that we need to find it. So I just asked him for any kind of information he could give me. And then because I've worked here so long, I had a really good advantage in that I know how the records are stored and how they were placed in off-site storage in our archival systems. And in the old days, that was a 3x5 card. And so they stored all those cards in order. And then from there, they got the computer technology that took those calls for service. And then they still were writing hand offense reports. So those offense reports would come to the Records Bureau to be stored and filed, because obviously a patrol deputy riding around in a car can't keep a file cabinet. And so everybody in those days would take the old records and they'd send them to off-site. So knowing that every section sends their records off separately to off-site, and that the records management people at that time didn't try to compile them together, I knew that there was probably some other sources that whoever did the searches just neglected to look for. So at that point, I just went through our archive records. Sure enough, I got lucky and it was still there, and it was where it was supposed to be. If you know what you're looking for, they are predominantly in order.
Did you know how big the case was when you were looking into it?
No clue. I knew it turned out to be a big deal when the detectives came here and did some interviews with our detectives that had worked the case. And they came and they gave me a cup from the Los Angeles Police Department, or a mug, and they were just very grateful and very appreciative, and just said how much it had helped them. And they made a big deal with it to the sheriff, and that's pretty uncommon in records management. You're like, okay, you kind of play with paper all day and just do what you're supposed to do, and you don't really think much more about it other than it's the nature of the job. You want things in order. I work hard to get it right so that it's just the way it's supposed to be. And I'm proud that we were able to help do something worthwhile and really help a detective get where they were going, because this guy was really bad, and he should definitely not be out running around getting to do this to more people. It just really helped solidify and promote what we do, trying to keep these records right for people. We have a cold case investigator that is very big on the old records as well, and is often trying to find things. And so it just makes a difference, and it helps.
As Linda Brown told the Gainesville Sun, there were over 3,000 case files in storage, but she found the right ones. Then she managed to pinpoint hundreds of pages that brought Little's Florida crimes, over 30 years in the past, back into the public consciousness. With her help, detectives were able to connect not only Florida victims, but other Southeastern cases too. Without Brown's work, our coverage this season would not be possible. But even with the information provided by Brown and so many others, there are still mysteries. The problem is that Samuel Little remembers a lot, but not the details that make finding records easy. According to Texas Ranger James Holland, Little's not good with dates, or even decades. And Little also has trouble with names. There are many women whose names he doesn't remember, or he never knew. But investigators are searching another way, through Little's art. He spent the last few years drawing his victims. He draws them from what law enforcement has called his photographic memory. Mostly portraits of Black women, though not all. And some portraits, women are crying, some smiling. All drawn in a style that shows some natural talent, but the pictures are hard to look at. Eyes and noses tend to be the crudest. Lips and necks and shoulders, those can be startlingly accurate. They're his favorite areas. He told author Jillian Lauren that when a woman touched her neck, it was like a sign, an invitation to kill. He remembered a little girl in his elementary school class who used to touch her neck. And he remembers a teacher whose hands would sometimes float to her throat. Both images excite him, even now. On some portraits, lines are drawn across the victims' necks. Little doesn't do much to identify these women, not as individuals. They get nicknames or nothing at all. Tampa Dope Girl, Fort Myers Girl, Homestead Air Force Woman, Plant City Girl, Atlanta victims he labeled Atlanta College and Atlanta Black. Like many others, they haven't been located. They are just pictures. There are so many pictures. The FBI has devoted a website to them, hopeful that friends or family of the mystery victims, the does, the uncorroborated victims, just might see. Little's crimes, they tended to unfold in a similar fashion. He'd often disable the victims with a single bare-knuckle punch to the head. He wanted to get to the point, a woman temporarily disabled in the back seat of his car, where he could use his strength and his weight to pin her so he could get a good grip. Little told writer Jillian Lauren about the experience. In fact, he told her about his very first victim, who he said touched her neck, supposedly giving him the sign, as they both sat in a cheap diner. He said he remembered her fishnet stockings and how she crossed her legs, all the physicality. Samuel Little told Jillian Lauren lots of things. He was usually up for a chat, But as Lauren wrote in her New York Magazine article, he is also mercurial. And according to the LA Times, he can shift into sudden violent rage without provocation. He doesn't like being challenged. He doesn't like being called a rapist. He doesn't like attempts to individualize his victims. A law enforcement officer we spoke to had a similar experience, that talking with Little was easy until they focused in on the victims. He didn't like that at all. But for the rest of this series, that's just what we'll do. Talk about the victims. State by state, all along the Southeast. We'll look at the confessions that don't have cases, at the Jane Does with no identities, Georgia and Arkansas, Mississippi, Florida, the cases that were solved that can build a timeline and tell us more about those that can't be closed, not yet. We'll start in Florida, the state where Little could have been stopped if everything had fallen into place decades ago. Then we'll head out and across the Southeast, following Little's trail. You'll hear from the killer himself, but also from families of victims, those working to close the unresolved cases, and even a teenager who traveled with Little while he committed some of the murders.
And tell me where you met her.
I met her in a nightclub in New Orleans. And while we were dancing, she says, you want to go riding after this, after this party's over? We were on Highway 10 and going toward Slidell. So I cut off, I took off the exit, went, and that sure enough was a road leading into the woods. And we went in and parked. So we finally got to where we were going, and it was a bayou, a river, a little water thing. And I grabbed her by the legs and pulled her to the water. Mm-hmm. That's the only one that I ever killed by drowning.
He was looking for individuals that he felt like would not be missed. He was specifically targeting vulnerable, marginalized women. Many of them were sex workers. Some of them may have had substance abuse issues or been transient. My experience in working with some of the victims' families is that he was dead wrong. They were missed. They were very loved. And their families were hurting and wanted to have answers, but he was very good about how he would immediately leave town after he committed a crime. He did not stick around to wait to see news stories, for example. He was very transient himself. He was moving all over the country. He had also, from my understanding, read detective magazines and been very interested as a child in crime. And so he was familiar with how to not leave a lot of evidence and strategically did that. So I think that was a big part of why he flew under the radar for so long. He literally just left and didn't leave a trace.
I'm glad they caught Mr. Little. I remember one time Porter asked me if I had something to say to Mr. Little, what would I say to him? And I told him the only thing I would say to him that I want you to feel what all of these women felt. But like right now, if I see that man, I don't want to see him. I probably wouldn't do nothing to him, but I wouldn't want to see him. And from what I hear, the man don't have a conscience.
We'd like to ask you now some questions in reference to some dead girls that have shown up throughout a couple of states.
In Ocala, in August, we found a body of a nude black female in the woods, right out in here. We have reason to believe that she was picked up at a bar in Ocala and transported out there. Do you know anything about that at all?
Okay.
Has anybody told you that they had anything to do with that at all? Did you have anything to do with it?
No, sir.
Were you with anybody when they picked up a black female at a bar?
No, sir.
Were you with anybody when they strangled somebody?
No, sir.
Has anybody told you that they strangled or killed somebody?
No, if they did, you know, I don't know.
If they did, would you tell me right now?
Yes, sir.
This season on The Fall Line, we're counting on you to help us highlight the open cases in our region. We'll share portraits and other photos on social media in the hopes that someone, somewhere, will recognize one of the Jane Doe victims or one of the unmatched confessions. Maybe you can help close a cold case and bring a family answers. If you have any information regarding the Jane Does and unmatched cases attributed to Sam Little, please visit tips.fbi.gov or call 800-CALL-FBI. If you would like to speak to a counselor regarding sexual assault, you can call RAIN at call 800-656-HOPE or 800-656-4673 to be connected with a provider in your area. As for The Fall Line, we'd like to thank all the listeners who've taken the time to support our sponsors, leave us reviews, or support our show directly on Patreon. We couldn't do it without you. Special thanks to Angie Dodd. Special thanks also to Brian Waters, who served as a fact-checker for this series. If you'd like to suggest a Southeastern cold case for coverage, please visit thefalllinepodcast.com and click on Case Submissions. We are also taking national cases for a special season, planned for release sometime in 2021. The Fall Line is created by Laura Norton and Brooke Hargrove, and is produced and engineered by Maura Curry. Written, researched, and hosted by Laura Norton, with interviews by Brooke Hargrove. Research assistants are Kim Fritz, Jessica Ann, Lex Weathers, and Brian Waters. Additional research by Haley Gray. Content advisors are Brandy C. Williams, Vic Kennedy, and Liv Fallon. Theme music is by RJR. Thanks for listening and supporting The Fall Line. We want to share a piece of news about another show that you might enjoy. Fall Line host Laura Norton and producer Maura Curry have launched a new independent podcast called One Strange Thing. It's a compact, immersive narrative show that explores mysterious local news stories from all over the United States about regular people, just like you and me, who have had extraordinary experiences that can't quite be explained. Please stay tuned for just a moment to hear the promo now, then head over to One Strange Thing and subscribe. You can find a link in our show notes. We all enjoy a little mystery. And on the new podcast, One Strange Thing, that's just what you'll get. Every other week, One Strange Thing presents forgotten stories from America's news archives. They all have something in common, a single element that can't quite be explained. These are bizarre events that unfolded in our country's local newspapers, but never made it much further than that. I'm Laura Norton. Join me on One Strange Thing, and you'll hear about a class ring that disappeared on one continent and reappeared on another, and the ominous whistling that terrorized a young bride in Louisiana, and the chemical warfare once waged on a sleepy town in Illinois, and the mysterious hum that's rattling Anchorage, Alaska. And then there's the house in Atlanta that once dripped human blood. And that's just the start. No matter the place or the people, One Strange Thing brings you stories that are very real and just a little otherworldly. Join us on September 8th to hear the first episode of One Strange Thing. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.